Welcome everybody. We're going to give you a minute to roll in here. We're expecting a big crowd from New Jersey tonight. I was telling Dan here, I'm super excited for this presentation because I'm from Jersey. Haven't I go home every year. Love New Jersey. Haven't lived there in a while, but I'm very excited to speak to my fellow Jerseyans or New Jerseyites or whatever we call each other. We call each other the coolest people. That's what we call each other, Dan.
Well, having visited up there,
Dan's
I
showing
understand.
up here from Ohio, well, from Kentucky, right next to Ohio, Cincinnati. So
That's right.
yeah. So speaking of, why don't as people are coming in here, give everybody a couple minutes and not so people don't miss out on any of the content. If you wouldn't mind, good evening, Jared. Thanks for saying that. Pop in the chat what year your child is graduating from high school. I know you guys are all from New Jersey. And by the way, I grew up in New Providence. So if there's any people that are from New Providence, please put that in the chat too. That would be super fun. But okay, we got 25s, 26s, 27. This is all
Love
good.
it.
All
Yeah.
all these 27s, you're gonna start learning. We got somebody with a 24 and a 27. Yeah. I guess nobody's from New Providence, Dan.
Oh, doggone it.
Darn it. Anyways, I'm sure there's people that are from near New Providence, but okay, well, thanks for that. Well, let's get started here. So, welcome. We are from College Aid Pro, and basically, I have a slide on this, but our mission at College Aid Pro is to eliminate the student loan crisis by empowering families to shop smarter for college. And what we are doing tonight is directly linked to our mission. It's what gets the two of us out of bed every day. And the more that you understand about financial aid, you are so far ahead of the game as a parent. And then the second piece that we're going to hit tonight that's even more important is understanding where you fit. I affectionately call it the crazy world of financial aid. And this year, I saw a couple 2024 parents that also have younger kids in the chat. You know what I'm talking about. It's been crazy this year with the FAFSA, which is a financial aid form we're going to talk about in a few minutes. A new one went live and it's been nutty. But even in a normal financial aid year, it's a very nuanced space. And with all of our busy lives, and you have high school kids and younger kids and older kids, it's a lot. And so that is what we do. We help you understand this process and then understand where you fit so that you can navigate this better and you can understand affordability. And then, you can sit down with your kids and you can have a conversation and set expectations around what you can afford and what different schools will look like for your family. And it's massive. It's huge, huge, huge. So that will relieve a lot of stress. So my name is Peg Keogh, and I've been doing this work for well over a decade. I used to be a financial advisor, and I have twins. So when my kids hit high school, which was quite a few years ago, I did this deep dive into everything college, like I'm sure a lot of you are starting to do. And I was just blown away at how much more complicated it was compared to when I was a kid. So I started my own business. Long story short, a couple years ago, I joined College Aid Pro. It's been a great marriage, if you will. But really, my best credential, I would say, is that I've been through this. Dan and I have both been through this. He's been through it with two, and I've been through it with two. So we're both here to tell you, you need some deep breaths throughout the process for sure, but you'll get through. And kudos for being here, because this is how you're going to learn and help navigate this with much less stress. So Dan, you want to take a minute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Peg. So, hey, welcome everybody. Super excited to be with you this evening. So my background, I was actually a financial planner for 25 years. And somewhere in the middle of that, I actually got introduced to families that needed help with college funding. And that evolved to then my practice that I developed. So I've actually been an independent educational consultant for 18 years. During that time, however, I also partnered with somebody to do the admissions process and then very quickly had to jump into that myself. And so over the last 18 years, I've done both the college funding and the admissions process, worked with kids and families all across the United States and even internationally as well. So great to be with you this evening to talk about this very important first step in this process.
Yeah, and you've got a unicorn here, everybody, because he's a financial expert, which is my sweet spot, but he also knows all about the admission side, which we're not going to get into tonight, but he knows all the pieces in the puzzle. So real quick, couple housekeeping things. I know I asked you to put that information in the chat. But if you have questions, which we encourage, we love questions. That's why we're both here. When one of us is presenting, the other one will be in the Q&A. So please put your questions in the Q&A so we have one place to watch. And you can be anonymous in there. So if you click that box, you can be anonymous. And we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can tonight. So don't be shy. We're happy to help in that way. So let me share my slides here and we will get started. Okay, so here we are. That's us. I already talked about that. There we are. So everybody should have received an email earlier today encouraging you to set up your free MyCap account. So Dan, if you don't mind, could you just pop that link in the chat for everybody? I
Yep.
see that a lot of people have already done it, so that's great. If you haven't, I strongly encourage you to do it. You go to that link, hit get started for free. What's super powerful about this is if you've done it, have it open to the side, because when we start talking about the student aid index and families, and I go in and look at a case study of a family and we're educating you, you can, like I said earlier, you can actually be looking at your family. You can be looking at your two SAIs and really starting to understand what it means for your family. So strongly encourage you to do that if you haven't already. And it's just 4 minutes of onboarding questions, and then you'll be on your dashboard. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan.
Great. Thanks, Peg. You know what? So, folks, I got to tell you, and I know Peg would agree with me on this, that one of the biggest challenges that we often run into when we're coaching families is the fact that they never got around to understanding this piece of the puzzle. You know, it's they've been dealing with helping their kids pick the colleges and all that kind of stuff. But tonight we're talking about financial aid, and what you need to know. So we're going to kind of get down to some basics here. Is that financial aid is really a discount to the sticker price. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. And the sticker price is dealing with this thing called the cost of attendance, which we'll deal with in just a second here. But know this, there's basically three types of financial aid that are out there. The first two are great. The first one is need-based grants. And let me be very clear about this. This is when, depending upon your financial circumstances, that you actually will qualify for these need-based grants through the colleges, even through the federal government. Those opportunities are there. So that's all based on you having a financial need according to the formula, and then being able to qualify for those. The next one is merit-based scholarships, and this is also free money. This is all based on your student. I mean, all the good things they bring to the table. So let's say that they are great in athletics, or maybe they're great in the arts, a dancer in the band, something like that, or with their academics. All of those are areas where a student can absolutely receive merit-based scholarships from the colleges and universities. And then the last piece of the puzzle is self-help. Now, what's interesting about this, it sounds like it should be a positive, right? Self-help. And work study can be, because that's a part-time job that your student would have on campus. Maybe they're working the information desk at their dorm or at the library or something else like that. But a big chunk of financial aid is often loans, and specifically student loans and or parent loans. This is not free money, folks. I want you to understand that, even though it's referred to as financial aid, it comes at a price, and it comes with, you having an understanding going in, which is why you've got to be super careful when it comes to how much debt you allow your student and or yourselves to take on, which is why we're having this conversation tonight. Okay, next slide, Peg. So let's start with this whole concept of need-based financial aid. When we're dealing with this, there's this formula that you all need to get used to, and it really determines whether or not you're going to be eligible for need-based aid or not. And just know that tonight's presentation is really here to cover both sides of this conversation. But it starts with your COA, which is cost of attendance. That's the sticker price of the college. And what does that include? Well, that's the tuition, fees, room and board, books, transportation cost, and maybe miscellaneous expenses. In other words, it's how much the college is saying it costs on average for a student to come to their school. Then you subtract from that this brand new acronym that's floating around out there called your Student Aid Index, your SAI. And I really do want you to get used to this number, folks, because this is the dollar amount that the colleges are expecting you, mom or dad, to help pay for college. And so it's really, really important that you understand what this looks like. It's a number that is calculated for you based on completing the financial aid forms, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And it's the starting point for each of the colleges and universities as to what they think you can pay. Whether that's a reality or not is a different story, but think of it this way. Let's just use an example. Let's say cost of attendance for a school is $40,000 and your student aid index is, let's say, 20,000. So that leaves an additional need. That's what they refer to this as, financial need of $20,000. The question is, how is that college going to fill that need? Are they going to fill it all with loans? Are they going to fill it with some grant money, some scholarship money, or a combination of all of those? It's really important because you need to know that every single college can package their final financial aid offer differently. And that's, again, why it's important that it all starts with the overall sticker price of the college, less your student aid index, which then leads to that financial need. Okay? Next
Yeah, and
slide.
it's important to point out too that this SAI, it doesn't mean that's all they think you're going to be expected to pay. That's what they think you can afford, but a lot of schools, they can't meet full need. Most schools can't meet full need. So many families will be in actuality paying more than their SAI. And I would say just all these years doing this, I've had one mom who saw an estimate of her SAI and said, yeah, Peg, that's in the ballpark. Most parents fall off their chair, swear, laugh. I mean, they just can't believe how big the number is. So Dan's now going to go into the parts of the SAI. And if you have your MyCap account set up, as I said earlier, you can be looking at your estimates of your SAI as, Dan's talking through this.
Yeah, thanks, Peg. And also, just one other key thing to point out to you, um, and Peg already mentioned this, or at least I think she did, is that there's two types of SAIs. There's the federal number, of course, and then there's the institutional, which we'll dive into that a little bit more. But let's start with some basics here. What is considered an asset? There's a lot of confusion. In fact, I will tell you today, I had a meeting with a family, and sure enough, they made this top mistake here. They added in the value of their 401k plan to the illustration. So, folks, here's the good news. The dollar amount that's sitting in your 401k plan does not need to be listed as an asset from the federal methodology. Now, I will tell you, and you really have to get used to this, there's the federal methodology and the institutional methodology, that those schools that use the CSS profile, that side of the equation, they do ask you to put in the value that's in your 401k plans. But again, that money is supposed to be protected even in that side of the things. Where this family got confused was that they only heard part of the story. And so they inadvertently added the value of their 401k plan to their assets. Do not do that. That's a protected asset. So, when you submit those financial aid forms, you need to realize that, again, that there are some things that are included and other things that are not. So, for example, is debt considered in this case? Well, unfortunately, it is not, meaning if you've got credit card debt, auto debt, home debt, I mean, other than, the fact that that's there, it's not a separate item that you can put into the equation. However, it could be that you've got some other type of debt, maybe some medical debt or things like that, that could be something that you want to bring to the attention of the financial aid office. So that's a different story. But the valuing of your assets really is a big deal. Know this. When it comes to the value of the assets, it's on the day that you submit the financial aid forms. And so whatever you've got in your checking, your savings accounts, your investment accounts, specifically your non-retirement investment accounts, that's what we're talking about there. Okay. Now, there's another big piece of the puzzle that you need to know about as well, which is the difference between how parent assets are handled versus student assets. And I want to try to make this as simple as I can. Parent assets from the federal side are assessed at 20% against financial aid, from the institutional side at 25%. So just keep those two numbers in mind. That's the parent side of the equation. When it comes to the students, actually, hang on a second. Let me reverse that. Parent assets are at 5%. You should have caught me on that, Peg. I was
I'm
talking.
deep in these questions.
I
I'm
can tell.
honestly, I'm not even listening to you, so I didn't catch it.
So we're going to reverse engineer this, folks. Let's go back in time for a second. Parent assets, 5% from the federal side, 5.64% from the institutional side. Okay. It's the student assets that are the kicker here, because they're at 20% from the federal side and 25% from the institutional side. So just keep that in mind. What that means is that if you truly have a student who's been great at saving money, maybe they've got $10,000 sitting in their checking or savings account, maybe they've even got more than that. 20% of that is going to count against them in financial aid. So it's the worst place, by the way, to have money. So just again, keep that in mind. Now, where there's a little bit of confusion for a lot of families is when it comes to 529 plans. Remember this, a 529 plan owned by the parents is for the benefit of the child. So the child is the beneficiary of that money. And so that asset is going to be considered the parent's assets, worst case at 5.64 or 5%. Okay, that's a good thing versus the 20% inclusion for the student or 25%. Here's another good thing. Grandparent 529 plans in the federal methodology are no longer taken into consideration. It's a protected asset. And so you go out there and have your parents go ahead and save as much money as they want to into their 529 plans, the grandparent 529 plans. It's really, really a great place to have that money sitting. Okay. When it comes to sibling 529 plans, again, when it comes to the FAFSA, you are not going to include those siblings on your students' 520 or their FAFSA, but they do have to include their own. So if you've got your son or daughter going to college, make sure that you include the value of that 529 plan, mom and dad, for yourself. Do not include the siblings. Now, things are a little different when it comes to the CSS profile because you do need to disclose things like that in there. So just keep that in mind. How about UGMAs or UTMAs? That's a Unified Gift to Minors Act, a Unified Transfer to Minors Act. This is an account that you've got, say it's a checking account or an investment account for the benefit of a child. Here's the bad news. That money is considered an asset of the students, and so it's going to count at 20 or 25%. So again, just keep that in mind. Also, any other joint owned accounts that you might have, that might be a little different. We like to say that depending upon those kinds of accounts, it could be that mom and dad, that's considered an asset of yours, and so it's just something that's important to look at. Now, how about real estate? This one's a confusing one for a lot of families. You see, real estate is one of those items that specifically the equity in your house that does not show up on the financial aid form from the federal side, so the FAFSA. However, from the CSS profile, those institutional schools, real estate is indeed counted as a possible assessable asset. And it depends on the schools and things when it comes to that number. So again, just kind of a snapshot of a couple of real specific items that you want to keep in mind when you're looking at this, the difference between these. Now, how about income, folks? Income is really important because you're using what's called the prior. So for those of you that have 2025 graduates, you're going to be using your 23 tax returns. And it truly is then, it's the income from that span of time. Now, where might that be a problem? Well, if you've got a situation where your income has changed in the current state, maybe whether it's, here in 2024 or in 2025 for that matter, based on any number of things, you may need to have a conversation with those financial aid officers. It's a thing called professional judgment where you can actually talk to them about that. But again, assets are on the day that you submit the financial aid forms, income is based on 2 years prior. All right.
All right. So now we've dug into need-based aid. So remember when Dan talked through one of his first slides where we talked about the way colleges are discounting? That second bucket was merit scholarship. So if you're looking at your MyCap account, or you're just listening to what Dan shared and you're doing some math in your head and you're thinking, I think my SAIs are going to be high. Well, Dan and I have worked with many, many people through the years who have SAIs literally that are six figures, right? So thank God that college doesn't cost that much, at least yet, right? But if you have a high SAI, you're not going to be eligible for need-based aid. So the need-based grants bucket might not be a way for your family to get discounts, but merit scholarships could be a great play. So that's why understanding this and understanding your child and your finances at different colleges is so important. So let's talk about merit-based aid. It's different in some pretty significant ways from need-based aid. I'm going to skip to the third bullet because it's the best thing about merit scholarships. They're almost always or usually offered for all 4 years as long as the student maintains a certain GPA. So when you're doing a 4-year cash flow, which I strongly recommend everybody does as you're building your list to know that schools are affordable over 4 years, because you want to look at it that way. You can put that merit award in every year, $20,000, whatever it happens to be. And that is a typical merit award, by the way. We're talking 5 figures a year. It, as Dan said, it's based on grades and test scores, talent. Different colleges award them differently. It's not a uniform way, and it's offered by the Office of Admissions. So they don't, most of the time, have any idea about your ability to pay. Bill Gates's kids could be offered merit scholarships when he obviously can easily pay for 4 years of college at any sticker price. They don't care. They're basically starting that discounting process to entice that student and to entice the parents to be excited to send their student to a school because they're getting discounts. So let's talk a little bit more about how this works. First of all, there are some schools in the country, over 100, that do not offer merit scholarships. The Ivy Leagues, MIT, Stanford, the NESCAC schools, which are in New England, Williams, Amherst, Bowdoin. There's not one student walking around those campuses that is, if they're getting aid, they're getting need-based aid. Those schools just, as a policy, their business plan, their structure is, we don't offer merit awards. That doesn't mean they're bad schools, but for you as a family, that's a really important thing for you to understand. If you have a high SAI for a school like that, you're not going to get any of their endowment money. So you need to think about that. So maybe you don't build a list of all those type of schools and think about strategies. If you can't afford to pay full price at $85,000 a year, whatever it is, or you don't want to pay that amount, how are you going to work through that? All right, private scholarships. There's different ways to deal with that. So just keep that in mind. If your child is a high achiever, really good test scores, or great GPA, taking AP classes and all of that, that's going to be wonderful at some schools. Other schools, it's going to be great maybe to get in, but you're not going to get any merit money just because they don't offer merit awards. It's another thing to think about with merit scholarships, and this is very forward thinking, is when you're building that list, you want to think about competing schools that offer merit. Because down the road, and I'm going to touch on this right at the end of the presentation, part of the process later in senior year, and I saw a couple 2024 parents with younger kids, you're in the thick of it, you can appeal to the colleges when you get awards, second semester, senior year. And so we'll have some kids deliberately apply to competing schools. If they love a certain school, and we know this other school is competing, they both offer nice merit awards, we'll have that child like say, hey, you don't like that school, you went to the campus, but apply anyways, because they might end up giving you more merit. And then when it comes to appeal time, we can reach out to the other school. So that's very kind of insider information, forward thinking information. It's planning ahead and understanding the system. Another thing that you see here on the slide is around cost is that we call them value schools. James Madison, my daughter went there in Virginia. It's an amazing school. And the out-of-state cost is a bargain. I know $40,000 a year is a lot of money, but it's a bargain compared to some other schools and their out-of-state tuition. And there's some really great public honors programs as well. So this might be the name of the game for your family. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go in and let's look at a sample family, because I think it's always helpful when you're learning to be able to actually see an example. So if you look at my sample family here, so this looks familiar, if you've got your MyCap account up, this is my family's dashboard, okay? And I put in Rutgers here since we're talking to Jersey people. But what I want to point out, and people ask this question, and Dan touched on this very briefly, is you notice up here, there's two student aid indexes. There's a federal SAI and an institutional SAI. So the federal SAI comes from the FAFSA. And most schools in the country are going to go off of that. That's the form that almost every school in the country requires. We're going to talk about it in a minute. There's a second form called the CSS profile that about 200, 250, mostly private schools require, along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of the FAFSA. And they're going to get that, and they're going to calculate a second proprietary SAI. And for a lot of families, it's higher. But you notice we have a range in our software. And the reason why we do is because these schools, they look at the primary home equity, the home you live in. They look at your equity, which is your I was going to say cost of attendance, which is the market value of your home minus your mortgage or mortgages if you have a HELOC as well. That's your equity. Some schools will look at that, almost all of it, as a liquid asset. And there's other schools that say, you know what? We require the CSS profile, but as a business policy, we don't expect parents to tap their equity. So a school like Stanford does not require that. So you notice here, very big difference between the net cost for my sample family, almost half off at Stanford, whereas at NYU, it's much closer to full price because NYU looks at a lot more of the home equity. So that's a planning opportunity for a family that's sitting on a lot of home equity. And then there's schools in between. So that's all built in here. But you notice here, what Dan and I have been talking about is that the sticker price, the cost of attendance, is really irrelevant if you can go in and understand where your family can get discounts, right? So that's a huge discount from Stanford. Very easy to look at an $89,000 school and say, we can't afford that, take it off the list. 45,000, I'm not saying that's not a lot of money. That's you're going to be paying half, and that might be part of your budget. It might be affordable. So you never want to dismiss a school based on the cost of attendance. That's the big takeaway. The other thing is you can search for schools understanding your family. But let's throw in, let's get a little audience participation here, Dan. So in the chat, you can put in the chat or the Q&A, just throw out a school that, you're an alum from, or just a school that's on your kids list. And let's just look at some schools, a couple schools here before I go back to the slides. Do you have one?
Peg, James Madison came up. How about that?
Nice. Go Dukes. I was very bummed that they lost. It
Yeah.
was a bummer. But they did. What are we gonna do?
University of
Okay.
Michigan. There's a Boston University. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's put in JMU. So this is a New Jersey family. I put in my old zip code and we're showing full cost, right? Because their SAI, if you go back here and look, the SAI is close to the cost of attendance. So that's a state school. Let's look at a private school, Dan. Did somebody put in a
Yeah. How about
private?
BU?
All right, so let's look at Boston University. All right, let's look at Boston. All right, so obviously private school, you look here, nice little decrease. So let's go in here and let's look at it. So we are projecting for my sample family over 21,000 in need-based grants. We're not projecting any merit, but down here you can see all the merit awards. BU doesn't have tons. Some schools have a lot, some schools have none, and everything in between, like I was saying earlier. So we're projecting that amount of need-based grants. So this information is super powerful for you all to have as you're helping your child build their college list. So hopefully seeing this in actuality in a case study is helpful to kind of understand what we're talking about. So let me go back into our slides here and we will keep going. So I'll talk through this one and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan, for the FAFSA. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of the two forms that you will need to submit. So as I said, most schools require the FAFSA. There are a few that don't. You can fill 2 hands max, probably not even. So assume you're doing the FAFSA for every school on your child's list. Many private schools, there's a few publics in there, as I said earlier, will require the CSS profile that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Just like everything else in this process, deadlines are a big deal. Deadlines to submit your application for admission are a big deal. And each one of those ways to apply for admission that we're going to talk about in a few minutes have a corresponding financial aid form deadline. So you don't want to miss deadlines with financial aid because you could be in the second bucket to get that need-based aid. It could mean tens of thousands of dollars of less aid in your pocket, less endowment money. So kids need to learn that, right? They need to learn how to hand things in time, get things done on time. So you want to be all over that with your child as you get deep into this process. If they have 8 or 9 or 10 schools on their list, they could have all different deadlines. All right, Dan, I'll let you take over.
All right. Thank you, Peg. So here's the thing. Every single school out there is going to take the FAFSA. And again, that stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. We are hoping, desperately hoping, that next year it will indeed fall back to October the 1st. And by the way, for any of you that are out there, don't make the mistake of thinking, I'm going to get an early start on this. I'm going to start working on it in my students, freshman, sophomore year, type of thing. So you have to wait until October the 1st of the senior year. We already talked about the prior year. We've talked about this understanding of the fact that it's your tax return, in other words, from 2 years prior. But here's something we haven't talked about. It's this whole understanding of who's considered the custodial parent. And why is that a big deal? Well, because with the FAFSA, what we're dealing with here is it's the parent who provides the most financial support to the student. Now, think about that for a minute. Let's just say that you're in a situation where you're divorced, but you, in the divorce proceedings and the way that things have shaken out, you're kind of covering expenses 50-50. Well, you're going to have to figure out in that case what makes sense as far as the parent that's going to be listed as the custodial parent, because again, only one parent in that case would actually be listed on the FAFSA. And just before you get excited about that, things are different when we talk about the CSS profile, but this is the way it works. If your student is applying to a FAFSA only school, then you're going to choose one of the 2 parents. By the way, the student's going to have their own FSA ID, which will need to be created. And that parent, who's the custodial parent, will also need to create an FSA ID, because in the current process, there's actually a situation where the student has to invite that parent to complete their section of the process, the parent side. So just keep that in mind. It's really important as we're going through this. And also know this, you're going to have a username and password, whatever you do, make sure that you write it down someplace safe, because in the future, you're going to need to get access to that. There's a two-step authentication process now that they go through, using either the cell phone that you've provided or your email, or, in that particular case. So just be prepared for that. So again, it all starts with completing the FAFSA when it comes to federal student aid.
Yeah,
Now, I
and
do.
this FSA ID, if you're married filing jointly, one parent is going to get it. Everybody who does the FAFSA, the new language, they're called contributors. Doesn't mean they're contributing money. They are obligated to. They're contributing to the student FAFSA. The student is contributing to their FAFSA. So, and I will say this, custodial parent, whoever provides the most financial support, that's a planning opportunity for a lot of families because it's close, right? And that's where you can step in, do some analysis and figure out which parent is the most advantageous. You want to be honest, but a lot of families are pretty close. So keep that in mind. That's a real planning opportunity for divorced and separated families.
Yeah, and that really goes into this next side of things here, is because again, there's definitely a unique way that divorce is separated. By the way, it means that you're living in separate households. It cannot be that you're claiming to be separated but still living in the same home. So that's again something to keep in mind. How about multiple kids in college? For those of you that have, and we saw it because you were putting in the graduation years of your students. It used to be that the federal system, used to give a discount for students, or for families who had multiple kids in college at the same time. That is no longer the case. And so this could be, again, some planning opportunities to be looking for some schools that maybe do still offer some discounting that might be out there. But again, multiple students do not discount it from the federal side. How about business owners? Again, in the past, business owners were somewhat protected based on the number of employees that they had, but no more. Every business owner, and this is the same whether it's for the FAFSA or whether it's for the CSS profile, have to go ahead and list the value of that business. And again, there's some unique things that can be done there as far as talking through that. Low income families, here's the thing that you need to know. The changes that just happened with the FAFSA Simplification Act were supposed to make things easier. Now, I'll tell you, this year it has not been. It's been a total disaster as far as the way that things worked out. In the long run, though, there is definitely more money there. I will say this, and Peg, I think you would agree with me on this. The process really is simpler. I mean, it's so much simpler if there weren't all the kind of um, technical
Tech
issues that they've been
glitches.
having.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
lot of tech glitches this year.
yeah. So once they get through that, next year should be a breeze for you, we hope. And again, hopefully opening up on
Knock
October
on
the
wood.
1st. Yeah,
Fingers
that's right.
crossed. Fingers crossed.
That's exactly it. Yeah. We already talked about the 529, just including only the student who's applying for college's amount. And then again, we've already talked about the 401k contributions. Don't make the mistake. Everybody looks at the question that comes up. It asks for how much do you have in cash checking and savings? How much do you have in investments? And they see the investments and they immediately think, what? Net worth. And so they start piling everything in there. Do not give them any more information than they need. Okay. Really important.
Yeah, and this number 6, it gets a little confusing because there's assets, like Dan said, and there's income. And so in the old formula, when you made pre-tax contributions to your 401k, 403b, which a lot of people do, comes right out of your paycheck, goes into the market, shows up in box 12 on your W-2, it was added back. So if you were married and each of you were doing it to the tune of 20,000 a year, that's 40,000 more dollars that goes into the SAI calculation. That could sting. Well, this was a great change because they said, you know what? If it doesn't show up on your tax return, which 401k and 403b contributions do not, IRA deductions, other things do, but those do not. It's not, the internal term is untaxed income. It's no longer untaxed income. So that's a huge change for families for the better. So now let's touch on this form that we've both mentioned a couple times, the CSS profile. So as I said, about 200, 250, mostly private schools. The only publics are UNC, Michigan, William and Mary, and UVA. They are state schools and they require the CSS profile, remember, along with the FAFSA, not in lieu of it. This form is very different from the FAFSA. It is much longer. It's about 3 times longer. And there's some key differences on this institutional, we call it institutional methodology, SAI, that gets calculated. As I said, when I was in the family case study, your primary home equity is treated as a liquid asset. So on the FAFSA, no mention of the home you live in. Other real estate, yes, but not the home you live in. On the CSS profile, a lot of schools are going to look at that. It's an appealable item, but they're going to look at it. Divorced and separated families, Dan explained, only that custodial parent is submitting the FAFSA. On the CSS, the custodial parent, that same parent, and the student submit the CSS, the main CSS, and then the non-custodial parent submits what's called a non-custodial profile. So it's not that hard to think through the math on this. On the FAFSA, you've got one income and set of assets for the parents. On the CSS, at most schools, they're going to look at both. Both of those forms get sent to College Board, which your kids will have a login. They do PSAT, SAT, APs. Privacy is maintained, and both of them get it. And then that college does their proprietary number crunching. Business owners have always been on the table. They ask all about your business, the revenue, the expenses. You're going to upload tax returns for these schools. They're going to really see your financial life down and dirty. That's just what they do. The form is invasive and it is complex. Most people make a few mistakes on the CSS because there's a lot of questions that are hard to know how to answer them. One of our colleagues, Billy Rabbit, he says, when you're doing the FAFSA, you might want to have a glass of wine or a nice cold beer. When you're doing the CSS profile, you might have to keep the bottle of wine, or if you're a beer drinker like me, out because you might need more. And so, all kidding aside, it is more laborious and it's a bigger deal, but you still got to submit it or else you won't get any of that endowment money. And remember, that's where these discounts are coming from. By and large, they are coming from these college endowments in the form of merit and in the form of need-based aid. And by the way, some colleges require these forms to be on file for your child to get that merit aid, which I know doesn't make sense because it's not based on your finances, but it is what it is. So you don't want to leave money on the table by not submitting forms. All right, I'm going to let Dan take this one because of his background in admissions and financial aid, and just a quick overview of the different ways to apply.
Yeah, thanks, Peg. And I will tell you, folks, you need to know that the dynamics of admissions have dramatically changed. I've seen it just in this last 5 or 10 years here. And what I mean by that is you have to know that test optional really flipped things upside down. And specifically, it comes to this whole idea of, are you going to apply early decision, early action, or regular decision? For that matter, there's also rolling admissions out there. But here's the thing. Early decision, the key with this is that you can only apply to one school and it is binding. It means that mom and dad, you and the student and the high school guidance counselor, for that matter, have talked it through and you've decided that this school, if the student gets into it, that the student is going to go there. And by the way, that you can afford it, that you can pay for it. Now, we're not saying that there aren't some times that you can still go back and appeal for an early decision, because you can, but we really encourage you to have an idea and an understanding right from the beginning, which you can do with the MyCap, so that you know what you're getting into, because you really do lose leverage. I mean, there's definitely a loss of leverage there, but remember, that's only one school that you can apply early decision. I am a huge fan of early action, and I'll tell you why. It's the very first thing it says here. It's non-binding. You see, it really can help because you're showing demonstrated interest in the college. You're able to get competing offers from multiple schools. So there's a lot to be said for this. And here's the other thing. You're going to find that the vast majority of colleges that give out their scholarships have early action deadlines. It could be that it's October the 1st, October the 15th, November the 1st, November the 15th, December the 1st. I mean, any number of these schools. And so you, again, you don't want to miss any of those deadlines, as Peg said earlier, because if you do, it can be cataclysmic to your financial situation. But again, do as many early actions as you want to. And then, of course, regular decision means that you've got all kinds of time to apply to these schools, although you still have to watch out for deadlines. I mean, one of the things that happens is sometimes a student will be deferred. They'll be put on a wait list from early decision to a regular decision timeframe. And that just means that the school needs a little bit more time to think about you, about your student, what they've done. And that's a time when you're actually giving them some more advice. So just keep that in mind. Big fan of early action or regular decision for that matter. Watch it if you're going to dive into early decision.
Yeah, and don't stress out if a school, I 100% agree with Dan about EA. I think it's that I made my kids, any school that had it and they don't all have it, I said, you're doing it. I mean, the other great thing in the family is that you're done before Thanksgiving with all the applications. So that's a huge piece of the journey that your child is done with. They hear sooner, and every kid that gets into their first school, even if it's their last choice, is elated because they know, okay, I'm going to college. I got in. So it's a win-win. But some schools do not have EA. So it doesn't mean if you're applying regular decision, and I just talked to a couple parents earlier on meetings, and the one said, oh, I think my daughter's hearing tonight from some of these schools that are either early decision or regular decision. They don't have early action. So don't stress about it if you're like, oh, they talked about early action, I can't find it. Not all schools do that. It just is what it is. But it's just it's huge. I can't encourage you more to have your child do that if you can make it work with your child and their schedule and the whole bit. So I've touched on this a few times. This is a whole webinar in and of itself for senior families, class of 2024, and we're actually doing a couple the beginning of April, all about reaching out to the colleges after you get an award. And the key takeaway is you can appeal many times. You should appeal and know the college is not going to say, how dare you reach out and ask for money? We already gave you XYZ. They don't do that. It's part of the process. So, for a class of 2025 parent, and I know there's a bunch of you on here tonight, just planting the seed that is your child applies, you do the financial aid forms, you get the award letters, you analyze them, and you appeal. That is a piece of the puzzle. And as I said earlier, you proactively build a list, realizing that appealing is part of the process. So just want to plant that seed. As I said, this is a 45-minute webinar in and of itself around best practice and when is it a good time to appeal and when is, it potentially a waste of time and all that fun stuff. So we have covered a lot tonight. So I feel pretty good. I'm sure Dan does too, that you've gotten at least one or two gems out of this, and you had a certain level of understanding, and hopefully it's up here. And as I said at the beginning, keep building on this. I always say, even when I had my own business, when I would have people come to my presentations, I would see them the next year, I would see them the next year, and then they'd come to me and it was super late. And they're like, oh, we're coming for help now. Keep the ball rolling. Don't go put it on a pile and say, hey, I learned a lot of great stuff. We all have busy lives. Keep things going. Because unlike retirement, this process, your child's going to be a senior at some point, class of 2027, believe me, time flies, right? So stay in the game. We have free resources that we offer, like our software. Again, strongly encourage you to get that set up if you haven't. But we also, for our high school partners that we're speaking to tonight, we also offer a free financial check-in, if you will, that you can sign up for. And we're gonna ask you a few questions. Are you divorced? Those planning opportunities that I was talking about, like, are you a business owner? Do you have multiple kids in school? You know, all those different planning opportunities that we can kind of help you start to think about and identify. We're happy to do that. So I strongly recommend, and Dan already put it in the chat, sign up for a free, check-in. We'll talk through some of this with you, and we'll give you 2 or 3, like, hey, these are your things. These are your things to think about in this process. So strongly recommend that you do that. If you are a class, I don't think I saw anybody put in that they were just class of 2024. I think there were a few parents that had a 24 and a 26 or a 24 and a 27. This meeting is not beneficial to talk about a senior, because all these planning opportunities, you're at a different point in the process, right? This is valuable if you're class of 25, 26, 27, so that we can kind of keep the ball rolling for you and help identify where you are. Also, please set up your free MyCap account before, if you haven't done it, before you hop on this call. So if you click that link, you'll be able to book time with either Dan or one of our other colleagues. His name is Matt Mulhern. They both been around the block for years and years and years, and they'll really set you up, give you some good information, look at your SAIs, and give you some insights to talk through everything. But at the very least, I just want to share my screen again. When I was in here with the sample family, this is our, what we call it MyCap for the consumer side. Set up your free account. You can also upgrade this. We call it the premium level, and that's $149 a year. If that number is like, wow, we can't afford that, or you're on free and reduced lunch, all you need to do is email us at support@collegeaidpro.com. So just the word support@collegeaidpro.com. No questions asked. We'll automatically comp you for the year. We want to make sure everybody gets what they need in the form of support. Otherwise, you can click over here. If you're in the free version, it's going to say upgrade up here, not talk to an expert. And then you can either upgrade to premium, or you can book an hour with, if you're a class of 2024 and you have some questions about appeals, that would be a great thing to do there as well. But just keep the ball rolling. We offer a lot of great webinars. We really value our high school partners. And, so click that link and sign up for a time to chat with Dan. You will be in good hands. He will take care of you. So, anything else you want to add there, Dan, before we let everybody go?
Yeah, the only comment I'll make to you folks, don't sit back and think that we're eventually going to get around to doing this. Take action now. I mean, I'm just telling you, you're going to be glad that you did, because of the fact that you are running your numbers. You need to know your numbers. Don't get to the point where your student is a senior and you're heading down this path of him or her applying to colleges, and you just don't know what the colleges are going to expect you to pay or how you're going to pay for it. Make sure that you're proactively having what we call the college money talk now. Be very transparent with your kids. I promise you it'll pay off in the long run.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say, somebody just put in the Q&A, I have twins too. And I wrote, woohoo. I mean, one thing to keep in mind, and Dan touched on this, but this is another, you can see I'm a financial planner by background. So another huge planning opportunity is that, as he said, that SAI for the FAFSA doesn't take into account, they ask you how many kids are in college, but it doesn't automatically reduce it by almost 50% like it used to. But the colleges can absolutely do that. So I'm saying this for my 2024s here, in case any of you have crossover years. That is a huge opportunity to reach out to the colleges in the right way. You're not negotiating with them. Reach out to them and say, hey, I know this wasn't taken into account when my SAI was calculated on the FAFSA, but I'd like you to reassess this, because I have twins, or I have an older child that is already in school, and I'm going to have 2 or 3 crossover years. So all these little fun planning opportunities. So sign up to talk to us for free, and we'll help you identify those, and then you'll be even further down the road in this process, and it'll relieve stress, and it'll help you get along with your kids better. So that's worth millions of dollars, right? So anyways, all right. Well, thanks for being here. And everybody have a wonderful night, and stay tuned for upcoming webinars. See you later, Dan. Have a good one.
Thanks, Peg. Good night,
All
everybody. Thanks
right.
for
Good
being
night,
here.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.